And now let's move on to talking about obedience and what is Stanley Milgram's classic experiment on obedience, dealing with the behavior that you change on your own in response to a demand from an authority figure. Stanley Milgram had a couple people participating in this, actually lots of people, and there were two roles. One was a learner, and one was a Confederate. Learner was the Confederate, and the teacher was the participant. Every time the learner got a question wrong, the teacher was to administer a shock to the participant. Each shock was to be stronger than the last and up to 450 volts, which is quite a powerful volt. And even on the little turn dial, it would say dangerous, extreme danger. Now, no actual shocks were administered as the learner/Confederate was in another room, and the teacher would hear the cries of the learner. Now, what was crazy is the cries were recorded, and as we said, there was no actual shock, but the authority continued to tell the teacher to shock the learner as they got the questions wrong. Meanwhile, the learner was yelling things that would make most people stop with the shock, such as, "I have a heart condition," or "It's really painful, please stop, I'm begging you." However, out of the 40 males who participated in this, 65% went all the way up to the highest level of shock, which was 450 volts. His experiment showed that non-hostile individuals can become agents of destruction when obeying a legitimate authority figure. And what was crazy about this is, again, the person that was the Confederate was playing along, the person who was the learner was playing along, but the teacher had no idea, but they still cranked the voltage up to have the person in so much discomfort. And it was crazy. Again, they wouldn't see the person, they would just hear them, but they still kept doing it because the authority figure was telling them to do so. So, again, what do we kind of take from this? Well, later experiments revealed that the most significant factor in reducing obedience was the presence of other teachers who chose not to continue. If there was another teacher that said, "I'm not going to do this," then that person probably would have stopped. But as people learned about this, it's crazy because this is a phenomenon that's been used to explain atrocities from like the Holocaust to Vietnam's My Lai massacre to the abuse of the prisoners at Abu Ghraib prison in the early 2000s, because it shows you that if an authority figure tells you to do something, even if it is destructive and harmful to other people, that they would then have that happen, and they would go as far as it goes, even to the point where it is very damaging to the individual. Factors in obedience, talking about authority figure as part of the factor, the situation, and the victim where applicable. So it depends on your viewpoint of the authority figure. It also depends on the situation. So in this case, the person felt like the person volunteered for this, so they knew what was coming. And then the victim, did you see them? Did you have any relationship with them? Did you know them? And that could be factors in this obedience. But again, this is where you think like, in the World War II times and Nazis, how they were able to massively murder millions of Jews. This would basically be based on what this was from Stanley Milgram. Roman numeral 2, group dynamics. Social group, this is two or more people sharing common goals and influencing behavior. So your social group would be like Genesee Christian 11th graders in psychology class. You have common goals, you influence behavior, you go to the same school, have the same rough belief systems. Social facilitation, the presence of others, increases individual performance on easy or well-learned tasks. So what we're saying is, if you, and we've talked about this before, that your performance on an easy or well-learned task will actually grow in the presence of others if you know what you're doing. And it kind of makes you play better, kind of having that pressure. Social interference is a task that is unfamiliar or difficult. Then the presence of individuals or a group can lead to a decreased individual performance. And think of it like this. It would be like you learning how to play the piano for the first time, and all of a sudden people start showing up, and you really, really struggle with this because all of a sudden more and more people start showing up, and it creates what we call social interference, and it actually decreases your performance. Social loafing, this is when a person contributes less when working with others in a group than when performing the same task alone due to less individual accountability. So this is where you get in your classic, you have a group project that you're put in, and you are with the other smart kid in the class, and then you get the one dumb kid in class. And the one dumb kid in class decides that he's going to social loaf. He's going to contribute less when working with a group than when he would if he had to do this task alone, just because there's less individual accountability. Social loafing is very, very common in group tests. Social striving, this is increased effort when working as part of a group. So therefore, when you are working together, this is maybe like the idea or the concept of a team. You are working very hard together, and you are trying your best to work as part of the group. And so therefore, you actually do well, and you start working hard because you're working with a bunch of people and you don't want to let them down. De-individuation, this is the state of lessened personal responsibility and self-restraint due to feelings of anonymity, meaning anonymous, created by being part of a big crowd. So this can lead to pro-social, meaning good, or anti-social behavior, which would be bad. Let me give you an example. An example would be sports fans rioting. You know, sometimes after a team wins a big game, a whole bunch of sports fans just start rioting. Well, these people as individuals would never really riot, but when they have a whole bunch of other people around them that are doing that, and they aren't singled out, they act differently. Large group of people looting stores, times of crisis. You'll see most people would never steal from a store, but in a time of crisis, everybody else starts looting a store and stealing stuff from them. They would do the same. But it could be fans cheering and dressing up crazy. Once in a while you'll see on an NFL game a 40-year-old man who has his chest painted and his face painted, wearing like this weird headdresses and everything. Well, he wouldn't normally do that at work, but with everybody else there, he feels like he can do it. That's called de-individuation. So a state of lessened personal responsibility and self-restraint. Like you do not restrain yourself because you're with a large group. Group polarization. This is when a group of like-minded individuals interact and their beliefs become more amplified and extreme than as individuals. So polarization means opposites. And so what starts to happen is when a group of people kind of all come together and they create ideas, it becomes very extreme very quickly. Think of it like this. When you guys do your homecoming planning, all of a sudden, it's like, hey guys, your homecoming theme is cereal. You're like, all right. So then all of a sudden one person says, okay, well, let's just have, we're going to, let's say your cereal theme is kicks. We're going to kicks the other team down the field or something like that. And then all of a sudden you're like, all right, well, we're going to Captain Crunchify you, and we're going to, and I'm coming up with horrible examples, I realize that. But what happens is all of a sudden your ideas become crazy, crazy extreme. And they started off pretty like normal, but the more and more people add on to it, the more extreme your beliefs become and more wild and outlandish. And this leads to what we call a risky shift, when members of a group are more prone to make riskier decisions than by themselves. Again, this is kind of like the law of men, or law of guys. I've told you this, every guy you add to the situation, you take away half a brain. This is the idea of group polarization. Because most guys would not, do something stupid and foolish by themselves. They always have to have a buddy or two or three. And that makes their beliefs or their actions extreme, and therefore they do something foolish. And that's what we would consider a risky shift, when members of a group are more prone to make riskier decisions than by themselves. Groupthink, this is the tendency for individuals to censor their own beliefs. Censor means to silent, to censor their own beliefs to preserve the harmony of the group. And what happens is, like, everybody is, coming up with this extreme, and you just kind of stay quiet because you don't want to ruin the harmony of the group. This can be disastrous depending on the circumstances. There's a story in the 1960s of John F. Kennedy's administration during the Bay of Pigs invasion. I'm not sure if you guys remember this from ninth grade history, but Kennedy wanted to wanted the Cuban nationals to invade their own country and kill Fidel Castro, and we promised that we would help them. A lot of the people on his staff didn't really like this idea, but because it was Kennedy's idea and some of the other people's idea, they just kind of kept quiet. And then, sure enough, what ended up happening is as we trained these guys to go back to Cuba to go kill Fidel Castro, about halfway through the invasion, Kennedy realizes this is a bad idea and decides that he's not going to do this. And we probably shouldn't have even sent them in the first place, but because of groupthink, people censored their beliefs to preserve the group harmony. Some groups prefer to have someone in their group designated what they call the devil's advocate, the person who is purposely always against what other people would believe, just so that other people have a viewpoint, which is a lot of times good depending on what type of decision making you have to have. But you need somebody to think a little bit outside the box. But groupthink, again, you censor your own beliefs to preserve the harmony. Minority influence, where one member of the group can change many people's opinion. The movie 12 Angry Men is part of this, and where one person in a jury of 12 was trying to do his best to change the opinion of all 12 individuals. Let's go through altruism. Altruism is a person will risk their own health and well-being to help another person. They'll talk about altruistic behavior. That's what this is saying. Like, you would risk your own health or well-being to help another person. Not done to make themselves feel good, but to literally truly benefit other people. This would be like if you saw somebody in a creek and they were really, or like on an icy, let's just say a lake, and the lake had been cracking and the person fell through the ice. This would be you going out onto the ice and trying to help them, and you're risking your own life by doing so. That's called altruism. The bystander effect is this: the presence of others reduces our tendency to interpret an event as an emergency. So think of it as if you are walking in downtown Frankenmuth and it's in the middle of summer and everything's just going well and everybody's hanging out, and then you hear somebody say, "Hey, that person robbed me," and they're screaming, "Help, they robbed me." Well, what happens is, with the presence of others, you tend to interpret the event as, you reduce the tendency for you to interpret the event as an emergency. Therefore, what we're saying is you don't really tend to believe that that's actually something that you have to deal with. And so as a bystander, you're like, it's not that big of a deal. And that leads to the diffusion of responsibility, the belief that it is not our responsibility to respond to a certain situation. When they first studied this, there was a situation that happened in New York, a lady by the name of Kitty Genovese. She was actually being murdered in a busy apartment complex. And everyone else thought someone would help her, and no one helped her. She was screaming, "This person's killing me! They're stabbing me! They're doing this! They're doing that!" And she's screaming, and other people heard it, but figured somebody else would do something. And the bystander effect can easily lead to diffusion of responsibility, where you don't think it's your problem and you don't deal with the situation. This happens in a lot of different settings where you're just like, it's not my problem. I'm not going to deal with that. But this is part of the opposite of altruism. Reciprocity norms, you are helping with the expectation that you would receive help if needed or have in the past. So what you're doing is, let's say that you see somebody who has a flat tire on the side of the road. You decide to help them because you think, well, somewhere down the road, I'm going to have a flat tire and I want somebody to help me. That's the idea of reciprocity. So reciprocal, meaning you give them something because in the future you might get something as well. All right, hopefully that was a pretty good explanation there. We're going to move on to Roman numeral 3, probably on Monday. So that should be it for today and for the weekend. Keep working on your Chapter 13 terms, and I'll keep you guys posted on any other announcements on the Google Classroom. Enjoy your weekend.